Hello, welcome to the studio. Today I'm painting, well, I don't know yet. I've got half an idea. And really, half an idea is sometimes a dangerous thing. Unlike my previous paintings, which you see, I've got a nice photograph, and I've done little sketches maybe, and I've got a very clear idea where I'm going with it. This I'm going to be doing today is done completely from my mind, from out of my head. That's where I seem to spend most of my time, is out of my head. But I'm going to paint from imagination. Now, I have done a little bit of colour research on this because I'm going to be using Arizona as a sort of a theme. I love those golden, orangey, red colours. So I thought, let's try and paint something, but not use a photograph. So with half an idea of what I'm doing, let's see what we can produce. Now, I'm sure you should watch all of this video right the way through because I have a feeling that what's going to happen today may resonate with a lot of artists who can't sort of get to that stage where you're painting away furiously and then suddenly you realise, what next? And you're lost. So let's see how we get on and let's see what actually happens as we paint, because I don't know yet. Anyway, sit back in those comfy chairs. I think a stiff drink maybe this time, and happy painting, people. I hope. So here's my canvas, set out in portrait style, just plain grey today. I think I need to start off by figuring out where I'm going to put my horizon line. Maybe I'll have one a little high and maybe one a little low. I'll use my brush to measure this side, and just like magic, I'll put one in the other side as well. But a bit lower. There. Now, let's begin using some Bob Ross liquid white to apply a thin, even coat to my canvas. This is a wet on wet oil painting technique. I'm going to use an old Bob Ross 1-inch brush to apply that thin coat. I take a small amount and just spread it out on my canvas. I like to work in sections, that way I get an even coverage. I'll finish off my canvas with some nice flat strokes, side to side and up and down, but make sure just a thin coat is all you need. I'm going to start off with a very basic palette. I'll add more colours as I need them, but I'll list them all down below. I think I want to start off with some yellow ochre, maybe a touch of bright red. Notice how I pull directly towards my thumb. I'm still using that old 1-inch brush. I gave it a bit of a dry clean first. One thing I know about yellow ochre is that it's not a very powerful colour. You notice that it blends quickly with the liquid white and sort of goes very pastel. I want a pastel sky, I think, but that's just a bit too pale. So add a little extra. That looks a bit better. Blend it out very well. No hard edges. Now for my second colour, some bright red. I'll take just a small amount and work it into the bristles of my brush. I'm looking for a sort of peachy pink colour. There, I think that's about right for my painting. Now, little crisscross strokes again and let it bump into the ochre. I put on more ochre than I thought I needed because I knew I'd be taking away some of it with this red colour. Once again, add a small amount and blend well. I think it's a bit too pastel, so I'll add a touch more red to this corner. Make sure you stand back often. Now, let's have a go at blue on that same brush. But be careful. You'll notice that as I try and load the paint onto my brush, I get some green. The yellow ochre is still active on my brush, so I think I won't risk it. I'll clean my palette and start out with a fresh but old brush again. I load a small amount. This is phthalo blue and it's very powerful, and I'm going to put it right up here in this corner. As you can tell, I'm going for very pastel themes this time, not strong dark colours. Add a small amount and let it slowly blend into the red. Blue and red make a nice lavender shade, so I'll stay away from the yellow. I'm happy with the colour I've got, but again it needs to be a little stronger. I'll tap a little more blue into my brush. I think I could maybe do a couple of small clouds. Just a little bit of paint tapped onto the surface of the canvas, and look at that, I can make some long, thin, stringy clouds. It only takes a small amount of paint to do this effect. And once again, add a few and stand back. Here's a nice close-up for you. Just tap. Keep on tapping. It takes time for the paint to come to the top. And then, before you know it, you have a lovely cloud. I'll soften them up with a few side strokes. Notice that some of those clouds have got a bit of a lavender tint to them. All very lovely. I'll add one to the other side, just so it doesn't feel left out. My inspiration for this painting is taken from photographs of Arizona, a very gold and red landscape. So I'll start off with a pale colour first, some white, a little dark sienna, which is actually a red tone, and a little yellow ochre. I want something quite pale to make some nice hills or some distant mountains. I allow a little bit of space above my pin line and just start sketching. Again, I'm just following my nose here, but that colour, well, a bit too pale. Let's give it a touch more dark sienna. It's easier to darken a colour than to start too dark and try and lighten it up. I think that's a little better. Remember, I'm looking for depth and distance in my painting. Again, it's another theme for this particular scene. I want my painting to look very distant. I keep on adding layers of detail, but again, keep them very faint and pale at this stage. Things that are far away have less colour. They're not so saturated. Now let's have a shadow colour. I stay using the same palette of colours, nothing new yet. More yellow ochre, more dark sienna, and this is going to be the shadow side of that distant mountain. Notice how I use my brush and hold it like a stick in the palm of my hand. This is a lovely soft stroke. I drag the side of the brush against the canvas. It leaves small marks, but no real harsh detail. There. It's a lovely technique and one that you should practice often. I think I want a little bit more detail added to this mountain. I'll go back in with a little of that shadow colour and add a few sort of nice cracks and crevices, maybe some more smaller peaks. I just add a touch of colour here and there, like little sort of abstract triangle shapes. And there you are. Instant 3D. It's not too hard, but don't again get them too dark. We want this to still look nice and distant. I'm going to bring this down a little bit lower on this side and just sort of do the lay of the land routine, but notice how I let some of the yellow peek through. Let's add another layer to the painting. Again, I'm using the sienna, yellow ochre and white, but just slightly darker. It's tempting at this stage just to add a new colour to darken that mixture, maybe some Van Dyke brown or even some black, but it actually creates quite a clash of colours. If you stay with the same colour palette, layer upon layer, you'll find that things are far more harmonious. It's a mistake I used to make, using every colour I had available instead of using just a simple palette of colours. So, let's add a few more highlights to my mountain. Again, I'm using colours from that background mountain. They look very much brighter against that dark shadow colour, but in actual fact they are exactly the same colours. That light sandy gold colour you see on the background mountain. Very light touch, just let the paintbrush drag across the surface of the canvas. This is a handy technique to learn if you find palette knife a struggle. You can create amazing mountains just with a brush. Let's see what happens when we do add a new value to this palette. I've added a tiny little drop of Van Dyke brown, just a tiny drop. Look how it stands out against the other hills. It's a cool dark brown colour against that very red tone, and it really jumps off the canvas, so we have to be careful where we use this. I'll blend it in to the other hills here and use it probably more on the near or foreground of my painting. I think I might have to cover that up a little bit more. Maybe I'll use a little bit of a greenish tone in a moment. Now, as I was painting away, it suddenly dawned on me that I should have some water. Maybe coming between these two hills and down and turning a bend and then working towards me. I think that gives me a nice visual reference here. But we'll see how that works out later on. Once again, I'm just following my nose. I don't have the photograph or any kind of reference material other than what I glanced at maybe here and there as I was painting. I want to create the look of a nice canyon. So I add a big hill on this right hand side and maybe another one just here. I use a little bit more Van Dyke brown on these foreground hills and mountains. It's that much bolder and stronger, and it brings it closer to me in the painting. Now let's paint some of this water. I'm going to use a little bit of white and just the tiniest little drop of blue. I'm also going to add a little tiny drop of red, because that sort of pale blue colour is a bit too sort of vibrant. If I add some red, it'll turn it sort of pale lavender colour, just off-white. There, that's the colour I'm looking for. I'm using a small round brush here simply because it's sort of neat. I can sort of squeeze it in between the other brush strokes and just add a few touches of colour here and there. But keep it nice and small. This is a long way away. I'm not quite sure about this. This doesn't look quite right to me, but let's carry on and you tell me what you think about this in the comments down below. Now let's turn that bend at the top there, but make it maybe a little steeper. It's a little too big and round, and you'll find that rivers, when they sort of change direction, especially in the distance, they have a little bit more of a point to them. So I'll take it off to the right a little bit more and add a bit more shadow on the inner edge. As I'm painting this bit of water, I think it looks a little bit too much like a man-made canal. It's just too straight. So watch this. Here's a neat little trick. I'm going to put a little bit of a bend in the water here. Notice I put a couple of small V's in from the right hand side and then bring in a little shadow from this left hand side. And what I do is I create a sort of another little V coming the other direction. And just like that, I've got some nice little wobbles in this water. I made the water go left and then right just by adding small V's. These sort of tricks are great little tips when you're painting your own rivers and waterways. You can just change the direction with just a few brush strokes. There. I'm still not convinced though about the background. I think that needs some attention. Now let's add a little bit of green to my painting. I had a look at some more photographs of Arizona and it's actually not always a desert. It can be quite a green lush place as well. So I'm using sap green and a little yellow ochre. Nothing too vibrant. I want this to be sort of a dusty green colour. Notice I put it on the same 1-inch brush I did the background sky with. That already had a hint of green on it when I tried to blend those colours together earlier. I also want to follow the lay of the land. This is a real classic Bob Ross technique. Just tapping and layering. I probably should have started towards the top of the canvas and worked down because I'm going to smudge my paint. There you go, I remembered at long last. Flip my brush over. Now again, I want to use just small amounts of colour here, nothing too vibrant. Maybe I'll use a little bit of Van Dyke brown or even a little touch of dark sienna with my sap green. That really darkens the colour and tones it down. I could have used black, but again that would have changed things a little too much. I'm going to tap over this darker area here. So this is a shadow green colour. As I come down this hillside, I'll angle my brush so it looks like the vegetation is growing over that little crest as it softens. Time for another new layer. Some dark sienna, a little touch of Van Dyke brown. I want to put something bold in here. Yes, that's it. I can make a big decision and drop in a really dark edge. I cut off that little waterway and all the background hills. I think I want this to look like it's high up. Again, it's another little trick I'm going to play. If I add what looks like to be an overhanging cliff. Yes, I hope you get to see a little trick I play here. I'm going to add dark shapes all across this area, cracks and crevices. Again, I still don't know really what I'm doing here. I'm just playing. I stood back and looked at some more photographs of Arizona, and I realised that it's actually quite a lovely reddy orange colour. So I think I'll add some reddy orange tones to this area of my painting. This really adds a sort of sense again of detail to the foreground of my painting, but just adding one or two colours. But I think I want a little bit more detail here, so I'll add a few dark crevices and cracks. I'm still just playing at this stage, and I don't really have much idea about where I'm going to go with this painting, and sometimes, well, you just run out of ideas. So when you do that, take a break. I'll have a look at it in the morning. So here's my painting after a night's rest. I look at it with some fresh eyes. Now, it's not without fault. There's a couple of obvious things I think are wrong. For instance, this water here. Gosh, that looks really awful, doesn't it? Water wouldn't be standing up like that. It looks like it's levitating above the ground. But you see, it was a little mistake I put in there. And well, it's something I need to fix. So this water needs to really be sitting down in the ground so you wouldn't see it as it cuts across the horizon. Even if I were to keep it, the angle, I'm afraid, is far too steep. But the rest of the composition is rather nice. If you haven't guessed what I'm looking for here, it's to create a sense of depth and distance. I want those distant hills to look like they're a million miles away, and then to be standing on something which is really nice and high. It's just an illusion when I'm just playing with lights and darks and colours, and then cutting off and making new horizon lines in much darker colour. Of course, I didn't finish this little piece here. I'm going to just drop in a little bit of highlight there to give the illusion that you're standing on the edge of a cliff. It's just playing with paint and just having fun. So let's see what else I can include in this painting. So here we are the following day, and after a night's rest, the first thing that hits me in the eye is that water. It just doesn't work. Water wouldn't be seen like that, coming downhill at an angle. At the very least, it would need a few waterfalls in it, but the water looks like it was sort of stuck up in the air, and it would normally be sat down in the ground. Remember, it's running in a trench, in a dip in the ground, so you just wouldn't see it. So I've painted it out. I just use a few of those background colours and add a little touch of highlight here to break up the background detail. It doesn't take long to move a whole river. There. Now that looks so much better. It was really bothering me from the previous day. Now, let's do the fun bit here and give the illusion its finishing touch. I want you to think that you're standing on the edge of a very high cliff. By putting in this little highlight, the illusion will be complete. I think it needs to be a little darker in here. Maybe I'll add a little touch of highlight to this little bump here. Doesn't take much, a couple of strokes of the brush, and there we are, finished. Now I'm mixing up a lovely dark orangey colour here. I want to add a little bit more colour to these sort of rocks here. They look still a bit too brown. They dried overnight a little bit and they dulled slightly, so I think more orangey colours will add warmth to my foreground. You'll often find that a night's rest really helps your eyes see the colours more accurately. Now, if you're enjoying my tutorials and you want to see more of my work, don't forget, give it a little like, that's the thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to ring the little bell as well. That way when I release new videos, you'll get a little bit of a reminder in your inbox. It doesn't cost anything, but it really helps my channel to grow. If you want to sponsor a painting, you can even drop a few pennies in my coffee cup. I spend all the money on future painting tutorials. Thank you. Now, let's add a little bit more shadow under some of these flat planes of rock, because that's what I think they are, like sort of upended paving slabs at sort of funny angles. Whilst the theme of this painting is Arizona, it's actually far more about how you can use light and dark and shadow to change how a painting looks. I'm just playing with colour backwards and forwards, but sticking to the same basic palette. And yet look how I've changed my painting over and over and over. painting's not always about doing a pretty picture. It's about practicing. Now, I bungled the start of this tree. Yes, I forgot to hit record, but I'm actually painting one of these lovely Arizona pines. It's growing behind the cliff, so you're just going to see the top of it. I thought I'd just introduce a little bit of vegetation in here, because otherwise it would just be a very sort of plain, blank sort of painting with just lots of cracks and crevices, a bit apocalyptic looking. So I thought, let's add a little bit of green here and there. I've got another filbert brush, and I'm taking some sap green and a little bit of Van Dyke brown and dark sienna, create a lovely sort of foresty green colour here. Pine green, I think that's the colour I'm looking for, but notice how I'm pressing my brush and really splaying those tips, and I'm just stabbing at the canvas here, letting the bristles splay apart and create that lovely sort of flue brush effect. Let's have a look at those reference photographs. You can see how the bristles just sort of spring apart and create those little pine needles. I'll come back and enhance those in a second. Now, this bit, a little bit ticklish, isn't it? A bit tricky. Watch this. I'm going to use my palette knife as a shield. The bits I don't want painted, I'll just cover up, and hey presto, a few dabs of the brush, a little bit of foliage there, and voila, perfect. I use the same trick to sort of fill in a bit of this edge as well. It looks a little bit sort of open and barren, so just a few dabs of dark. Now, let's add a few little sparkles and highlights. A tiny drop of oil or odorless thinners and a little bit of brighter yellow-green colour, just to enhance those nice little sort of pine needles. The light's coming from the right, so that's the brightest area of my tree. I'll just add a few little touches here and there. So, what do you think? The top of a pine tree? Well, I think it needs a little friend. Something needs to be done with the edge still. It looks a bit too sort of stark, and I think I might have to drop something in this area. Time for some more time lapse. I'll block this in, and again use that little trick to add a small tree here. I think maybe this one though needs to look like it's spilled out over the edge of the cliff. That's in the background and this is in the foreground, but I'm not so sure I like it. Covering up the water a little bit too much. Yes, I think I'm going to take off this bottom edge. Quick go with a baby wipe, and suddenly the tree is now behind the cliff. Doesn't take much work to fix that. A few more highlights, and I think I'm at another sort of hiatus. A time to stop again and have another think. So, here's how I left my painting. Not quite finished. And as you saw, well, even those trees eventually gave up the ghost. Yes, they surrendered to the power of the baby wipe. They just were covering up too much of my scene, so I wiped them off. But one good thing happened though, in a happy little accident here, is that can you see that back in the distance? It almost looks as though my little river is going off around a little bend and off into the distance there. So that's a good thing that happened when I wiped off those trees. But I think you can see here very clearly that sometimes just having half an idea really isn't enough. You need a bigger idea of what you're doing. You do need some ideas. You do need to do a better sketch and have some really ideas, some direction of where you're going, because it's all too easy to kind of get to this stage where all I'm doing is I'm just moving colour about, but I'm not making any sort of sensible decisions. I want you to drop comments down below and tell me what I should do next with this, because this is really part one. Now, part two will be a much shorter sort of bit, because I've done a lot of the work already, but I want to hear your thoughts so that we can finish this painting together. Anyway, till the next time, happy painting people, and don't go in with half an idea in future. Now, this is all your fault, because it was one or two of you that just said, oh, paint an original idea. So I did. This is what happened. Your fault. So,